All right, welcome everyone. We may still have some folks joining, but we want to get started since it's at 4. This is the How to Work with FSA webinar, which is being put on by the Farmers of Color Network and the Resources for Resilient Farms project. So before we get into conversation, just a couple housekeeping notes. This is a Zoom meeting, so folks have the ability to unmute, but I ask that you keep yourself on mute for the whole webinar just to keep the audio clear. There'll be some time at the end for Q&A. So if you have any, if you want to come off mute at that point, ask a question, you're very welcome to do that. So we are recording this webinar and it will be shared with everyone afterwards, hopefully tomorrow or later this week. We'll have a number of people on the call today, so we won't do individual introductions, but feel free to use the chat box just to introduce yourself, your name, where you're calling from, maybe a little bit about what you produce, just so we can get a sense of who's here. And if you think of any questions as we go through the webinar, please feel free to add them to the chat box, and we'll save them for the Q&A breaks, just so we can make sure we're addressing all questions. All right, and kind of an overview of our agenda today. We're going to start off with talking about Farm Service Agency, kind of the basics of history, function, structure, what to do before, during, and after a meeting to establish working relationship, and some best practices for addressing issues that could come up with service provided. And then in the second half of the webinar, we're going to have 2 farmers joining us who will be sharing their experiences working with FSA offices, how they've built good working relationships, and how they've navigated addressing challenges or issues that have come up. All right, first, who's on the call from RAFI-USA? My name is Lisa Mish. I'm the Director of Outreach and Technical Assistance, and I'll be presenting on the first half of our conversation this afternoon. We also have Nikki Presley, who's the Farmers of Color Network Program Coordinator, who will be moderating our farmer panel, and Sabine Freed-Bernards, who's Farmers of Color Network Grants Coordinator, who is moderating the chat, and also the person to reach out to if you're having any technical issues. All right, so I wanted to do a quick overview of the Resources for Resilient Farms project. That's where this webinar is coming from through this project. It's funded through a cooperative agreement with FSA, Farm Service Agency, and the focus of this project is to offer technical assistance, one-on-one support, and educational outreach around specifically disaster assistance programs available with FSA. And really focusing on BIPOC producers in the Southeast region. So our goal is to make sure farmers are aware of the different programs, help determine if certain programs are a good fit for their situation, and then to help access them either through applications or working with offices. And we have an email. You can reach out to us by that email for assistance. We have a phone number as well as an intake form. And we'll throw the link into the chat of our main Resources for Resilient Farm project webpage, which includes a lot of educational resources, some recordings to past events, and that inquiry form that I mentioned. And as a disclaimer for this webinar today, this is meant to be sort of a general overview of how to work with FSA. As this is funded through a FSA cooperative agreement, we're focusing on Farm Service Agency offices as opposed to NRCS or Soil and Water. And we're not trying to do a thorough overview of all the loans and programs that FSA has to offer. That would take quite a long call, but we're really focusing in on the process of working with FSA and navigating those offices. Through the registration forms, it looks like we have quite a diversity of some people that have never worked with FSA before, maybe are just starting out, and so starting that relationship, and some that have great relationships with the office. So quite a collection of folks on the call, also in terms of commodities and scale. Okay, so I did want to say, our goal for this webinar today is that for everyone to feel confident and ready to take advantage of what FSA has to offer farmers. And there are a lot of different loan programs and other programs that are available that can help increase the capacity of farms. But we also know that some farmers are rightly apprehensive or skeptical or just don't trust working with FSA. So I did want to have an acknowledgement that USDA does have a long and well-documented history of racial discrimination, particularly for Black farmers, that has resulted in them being squeezed out of access to credit or programs or out of farming altogether. This discrimination also extends to gender and not recognizing the needs of small and mid-scale producers. And through RAFI's own farm advocacy work, we know that this discrimination still happens in offices. With that being said, we have an administration that has expressed a strong desire to make sure that farmers of color and other underserved groups are receiving adequate support and that any discrimination is being addressed head on. And we've seen some action already through the creation of an equity commission and through devoting dollars to cooperative agreement projects like this, where they're putting money towards organizations that have connections with these underserved groups that they've identified to make sure that they're reaching all the groups that they want to be reaching. So our goal today is to break down how any farmer can work with FSA, again, depending on whether you're starting out from scratch or have had interactions in the past, and that you feel confident and motivated to start building that relationship and accessing resources. And we also want to make sure that farmers know their rights and know what FSA's responsibilities are to them, the farmers they serve. So what is Farm Service Agency? It is an agency within USDA that has evolved in name and function widely throughout the years, but traces its beginnings back to the 1930s during the Great Depression through the Resettlement Administration, helping farmers affected by the Dust Bowl. It's morphed into Farm Security Administration, Farmers Home Administration. In 1994, we see the name Farm Service Agency established, and it encompassed previous programs like the Agricultural Stabilization and Conservation Service, Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, and Farmers Home Administration. And as of today, FSA's responsibilities, there's 4 bullets there. I bolded the first 2 because those are the ones that are most pertinent to farmers usually, which is farm programs. Talk a little bit about that, but include things like conservation, disaster relief. Then there's farm loan programs, providing credit to expand, start, maintain family farms. That comes in a couple different categories. And then other responsibilities include commodity operations and management and state operations. I wanted to include this organizational chart of USDA just to give you a sense of where does FSA fit within the whole agency, because USDA is a big agency. It administers SNAP, it does a bunch of research. But you can see I circled it down in the bottom left. It exists under that function of farm production and conservation. And it's grouped with maybe other offices that you're familiar with, like the Natural Resources and Conservation Service and Risk Management Agency. So that's where Farm Service Agency sits. And then within Farm Service Agency, it has the advantage of having representation on multiple geographic scales. So you have the county office, and those are the folks that are in the field, able to work directly with farmers, administering programs, and there's lots of decision making that happens at this level. And this is a level that most farmers are interacting with FSA. Then every state also has a state office where it performs a variety of functions, but they can set state-specific rules or rates or thresholds that pertain to programs. They may be requesting particular funding sources from the national office, and there are also program experts at the state level for different things like loans or a NAP program specialist. And then you also have your FSA national office, which can set nationwide rules and rates and thresholds, and is a final decision maker for many programs and can deliver nationwide guidance and directives. All right, so why would farmers want to work with FSA and what does it have to offer? I am going to hit on those kind of 2 bullets in that previous slide of farm loan programs and farm programs. And I'll emphasize that within FSA, there is kind of delineation between those 2 groups. So if you're talking to someone on the farm program side, they might not be able to answer your questions on the farm loan side. So knowing who you're talking to within FSA is really helpful. So just thinking on the farm loan side, you know, this is financing to start, expand, or maintain a family farm. And FSA provides these loans because it's the goal of helping farmers obtain loans at reasonable rates, either through USDA directly, being the lender, or through a guaranteed loan where you're working with a USDA approved lender. And there's a couple different loans that farmers can look at. You know, ownership, that would be your longer term loan to maybe purchase farmland. Operating, that'd be annual or short term to do production. And then there's some other categories like microloans are especially good for beginning farmers to obtain lending at reasonable rates. Then we have you know, other programs, and just listed some of them here as kind of starting points, but there's a selection of disaster assistance programs for farmers that have experienced some sort of major loss event or natural disaster. So something like, you know, livestock indemnity program. If you are a livestock producer and experience you know, mortality rates greater than would be expected because of some sort of loss event, this program would could provide some payments for that loss and compensate that loss. And non-insured crop disaster assistance program, which is commonly referred to as NAP. Similar, you know, if you experience sort of crop failure above what would be expected due to a loss event, you can provide some sort of payments for that. And we did do an in-depth webinar around NAP a little earlier this year. So if you are curious about that, we'll throw the link to that recording in the chat if you want to check that out. FSA also has a number of conservation programs. The Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program is one of the major ones, where they're providing farmers a yearly rent payment for removing environmentally sensitive lands off of agricultural production. And there's also one that's specifically around grasslands. So that's something you could ask FSA about. Or the Emergency Conservation Program is helping pay for the expense of rehabilitating land that was damaged due to a disaster, so it's back into agricultural production. Other programs like organic certification cost share to help shoulder some of the expense of getting certified organic, dairy margin coverage, market facilitation. Again, it's not our goal to go over you know, any of these programs in too great of depth. It's just to give a sense of what programs might be interesting and kind of be a starting point for conversation if you go into a local office. Beyond the farm loans and farm programs, some other incentives, reasons to be engaged with FSA is so that you receive ongoing newsletters about latest programs that are available. They may send out, you know, this new program started, this deadline's coming up, so just being in the know is really helpful, and newsletters are one of the main and only ways that FSA is able to really communicate directly with producers. So it's helpful to get those. Also, it's an opportunity to vote or be elected within FSA county committees. So FSA county committees are an important part of the administration of FSA programs, and it's on the local level, includes farmers that are within that county. And it includes decision-making around producer appeals, conservation programs, disaster payments. So another important place of governance that you can either elect someone into or potentially participate in when you are engaged with your FSA office. Okay, some of you may be very familiar with your FSA, where your FSA service center is, but for anyone that isn't as sure, There's a link on the slide, and maybe we'll also put it in the chat to where you can find exactly where your FSA service center is in your county. So if you go and click on your state, you can then click on the list of your county, and it'll take you to this list here. This is where RAFI's office is located in Chatham County. And I can see that the Pittsboro Service Center is located at this address. I can contact them this phone number, and this office includes the Farm Service Agency, the NRCS office, and the Conservation District. So kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of different offices. In some counties, they may be in several different locations. Some of them are, they tend to try to group them together. And then I can see that there's also a rural development office, not in Chatham County, but in a nearby location. Okay, so basics of how to start working with your FSA office. If you are wanting to start the conversation, where do you start? And sort of the next few slides, the 1, 2, 3 steps. This comes from a resource that USDA has put out for beginning farmers, and this is the exact advice that they provide for how to set up meetings and what to do after for follow-up. So first is making an appointment. Once you locate your service center, you need to call or email to schedule an appointment. There were some specific COVID directives earlier of not being able to do in person, and I think a lot of offices are now doing in person, but it may vary from location, so you can ask about that. And you don't need to say I want to go in and talk about this specific program in order to set up an appointment. You can be generally asking, I want to learn more about what programs might apply to my farm operation and what can support me, and that can be a starting point. Maybe one thing to mention is that if you are hoping to specifically talk about farm loans, oftentimes there's a loan officer that is serving multiple counties, and so it can be harder just to find times to meet with them. So maybe not expect that to be an immediate turnaround or meeting with them the next day, but you might have to find a time that works well for their schedule. As you're making that appointment, thinking about preparing for the visit. So depending on what you want to talk about, maybe ask the staff member if there's any documents that you can be preparing ahead of time to make the most of your meeting together. So if you're thinking about a farm number, that could be putting together your deed or lease agreement, identification. If you're thinking more about loans, that could be making sure you have a Schedule F or insurance guarantees with you when you go into the office. And lastly, be thinking about your goals and your vision, and be ready to explain what you're hoping for your farm, and that can help the FSA agent also think about what programs might be a good fit. Okay, and then during your visit, if you don't already have a farm number, registering for a farm number would be an excellent thing to make sure you get done in your initial visit. And this is it's a number that identifies the farm. It's not for the farmer, it's for the farm land, and it's required to participate in many USDA programs. So it's kind of your entry step for a lot of eligibility. If you don't have a farm number, we have a blog post on our website of how and why to get a farm number. So I suggest taking a look at that. In addition to that, discussing business goals, like I mentioned, there might be more kind of questions about your production, timing, markets, so they can get a sense of what might be applicable for your business. You may expect to also review other standard forms that are often required for USDA program participation. I mentioned 80-1026 and CCC 941 here, which that applies to conservation compliance and adjusted gross income verification. So there's usually a collection of some forms that you just need to get done kind of on the front end, and that will make doing business with USDA easier as you go along. You kind of have that baseline. And lastly, during your visit, you just want to make sure that you've signed up to receive any updates that FSA would be putting out about sign-ups, deadlines, things like that. And after your visit, so I want to talk a little bit about receipt for service. A receipt for service is a document that summarizes who you talked to when you visited, when you talked to them, an overview of what sort of services you requested to talk about, and what action was taken or recommended by the FSA agent. And it's in a document that applies to any in-person visit, any phone call, any email. It has to do with communication with the FSA office. Prior to the 2014 Farm Bill, FSA was required to give farmers a receipt for service anytime the farmer requested it. After the 2014 Farm Bill, the policy changed, and FSA is required to give a receipt for service regardless of whether the farmer requests it. From what we hear from farmers, some offices are in the habit of providing receipt for service each time, some are not. So after your visit, especially if you're just starting out, make sure you ask for a receipt for service. The first advantage of this is that you're creating documentation of what FSA has advised for you, and you can go back and reference things. While we wouldn't want there to be an adversarial sort of relationship with FSA, the other advantage of having receipts for services is you have the documentation of what FSA has advised you if you need to go back and make a case for something. But asking for those receipts for services early in your relationship is recommended. Also, after your visit, filing acreage reports. So this might seem kind of strange of, why do I need to tell USDA what I'm planting and where and how often I'm doing it. But acreage reports are another good way to remain eligible for different USDA programs. And when FSA knows that you have a certain thing in production and there is a program that comes online that would apply, they can let you know. So this sometimes is useful for different disaster relief programs, or let's see, it was last year or the year before, this pandemic cover crop program came up that provided payments to farmers that were doing cover crops. And if someone had an acreage report on file that they were doing cover crops, FSA knew to let them know directly that there was this program for them. So that's another good way just to kind of remain eligible for potential programs. Third, just staying in touch with FSA offices are good if you have any business changes or you experience a disaster. One reason for that is that many of the disaster assistance programs require farmers to file some sort of notice of loss with the office within a certain timeline. Sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes it's 3 days. So just letting an FSA office know, like, I had this big crop failure, or I had grazing land that was damaged. That can be helpful for different eligibility, and just so the county office has a sense of impact and how farmers are doing in the fields. And lastly, setting up an online account. So farmers can create their own account through farmers.gov, and that just is another way for them to manage their business with FSA online, like submitting documents or signing things. And so that can create a greater ease with working with FSA. Okay, so that was all like the kind of, the best practices, the recommendations of how things will go. But sometimes reality is more complicated than that. So I want to talk a little bit about what we sometimes hear from farmers on the ground of interactions with FSA, where it doesn't feel like things are going by that ideal of the 1, 2, 3 step. So we've heard from farmers that sometimes they'll go into the office and they feel like they got the brush off. Either the loan officer didn't have time for them, or they said they didn't have any programs for them. And sometimes farmers feel like that's related to their race or their age or gender or their farming size. Similarly, sometimes FSA agents don't inform farmers of a particular program that could in fact be useful for that farmer. Some farmers report long delays in servicing and communication and needing to follow up. And there's also the reality that a lot of FSA offices are understaffed and are experiencing major workforce transitions of people retiring and new staff coming on, and they're just being trained in process. So there being some communication breakdowns or some difficulties around that. And then also wanted to acknowledge that there's power dynamics in play when we go to FSA offices. FSA agents hold a lot of information and power, and that can cause stress when you're working with someone that has the ability to make a decision that can affect your operation and the success of it. So that's a reality that we deal with. So then thinking about best practices for farmers that want to work with FSA, I want to leave most of the space for our farmer panelists to talk about this, but first step is always trying to build that positive relationship with the office. So if there are issues that come up, if there are communication breakdowns, you have a base to work through things and try to come to an agreement. If that doesn't seem to be working, or if you feel like you're not getting adequate assistance, there is also other steps you could look at taking. First would be if you wanted to check in with like a third party, or if you're like a BIPOC producer in the Southeast, you can check in with RAFI, like to get a second opinion. Maybe you come out of office and you think like, I don't know if I quite understood that, or maybe I'm missing some context. Just talking with like another farmer or farmer serving entity to get another perspective can be helpful, or even asking someone to go to in-person meeting with you just to be a second pair of ears or take notes while you're listening. There's also reconsideration in mediation processes for certain USDA programs. So if you receive an adverse decision and feel like you shouldn't have, you have the right to request a reconsideration with the decision maker and see if they will reconsider their decision. And then finally, there's appeals and civil rights complaints. So if you feel like you were unfairly denied for something or were intentionally uninformed or misled by an FSA office, you can go through an appeals process. One thing I'll note about that is that can take months to get through the whole process. So depending on what you're trying to appeal, it could push you past some important planting dates. So time is a consideration there. Civil rights complaints are another thing that often take a lot of time to go through the whole process. And we have heard from some farmers that they didn't quite get the satisfaction that they were hoping for from that process to start with. But know that it is an option for you to pursue if you feel like you've been unfairly denied. And lastly, I'll throw in RAFI's Farmer Crisis Hotline at the bottom, which is open Monday through Fridays, 9 to 6. Call us if you've received an adverse decision from an agency, if you feel like unfairly, if you're dealing with some sort of loss or disaster, going into mediation, or need assistance negotiating with lenders. I also want you to know that that's a resource. Okay, I think that's the end of the first part. And before we go into the farmer panel, I wanted to stop if there was any questions that came up during the first section.
Folks can feel free to come off mute. I also have some of the questions that were in the chat, but if anyone wants to ask a question with their voice, we'll give a second for that.
Maybe we'll go with any questions in the chat.
Yeah, there was a question about the value-added producer grant.
Just in general, the value-added?
Sorry, the value-added producer grant and about that program. And so with any specific programs, we can send some links to follow up. I know Lisa just did a webinar recently about that. So we won't go over all the specifics of those small ones, but I noted any of the, then someone had a question about form updating. So we'll email those out, the answers to those out with like a follow-up email. Someone is asking also about how to sign up for newsletters. That's another thing we can share. So I think we can do the panel, and if people have questions after that.
Awesome. And was that the RAFI newsletter or FSA newsletter?
I think the FSA newsletter, yeah.
Okay, great. Great, well then I will pass it over to Nikki for our farmer panel.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you all for joining us today. So this last bit of our webinar, we wanted to spend some time talking to a couple of farmers and getting their experiences working with FSA. And as Lisa alluded to, experiences vary from farmer to farmer. So we want to recognize and thank these two farmers for taking time out of their busy farm schedules, their busy days to share with us about their experience. They'll be sharing some challenges, some successes, and any insights they might have to share with fellow farmers here on the call. We have with us today Anita Roberson, who's a farmer at Botanical Bites and Provisions in Virginia. And also farming in Virginia, we have Chardell Gerald with Rethinking the Leaf. And so we'll start with both of you. If you'll just kind of give us a brief background of, your farm, what you're growing, how long you've been growing, just sort of how you got into farming. And then we'll start there. Anita, we'll start with you if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem. I'm happy to be here today. I'm located in Spotsylvania, Virginia, and I farm along with my husband, and we've been farming now for about 9 years. We grow primarily fruits and vegetables, cut flowers, and we also raise honeybees. We have 3 high tunnels. Our farm is about 10 acres, and we grow without pesticides, herbicides, or any kind of preservatives, and we're certified naturally grown. We love what we do. We also have a value-added component. I was a recipient of a Rural Development Value-Added Producer Grant, and I'm in my final year of that grant program. So what I do is I'm also a beekeeper, so I take the honey and beeswax and I make natural cosmetics. And I'd make things like lip balms, soaps, lotions, and salves. So that's pretty much my background. I was in the military, and then left the military to work in the federal government in Washington, D.C., retired and became a farmer. I am a 4th generation farmer, but I didn't grow up on a farm. Went through a lot of training through Virginia State's small farm outreach program. And I'm sure they have similar programs in your county with extension officers, and learned how to, farm the contemporary way and really enjoying what I do. So that's pretty much who I am.
Thank you. Chardell?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chardell Gerald, and I'm the owner of Rethinking the Leaf Corporation. And I came to farming by way of my family having been in the farming industry for generations. And I grew up on the family farm in North Carolina. However, I did not pursue agriculture as a career until recently, when the 2018 Farm Bill was passed and hemp as a domestic crop was permitted or legalized for commercial growth. And so in 2019, myself and my partner and family members who have been involved in farming pursued the opportunity to farm. And we were looking initially at operating our farm in North Carolina, which is where our land existed in Robinson County, but we ran into some challenges with being able to obtain the registration to grow hemp in North Carolina due to how they had set up their agricultural hemp program. And so I explored Virginia because that is where I lived, and I was living urban Virginia in the city of Newport News. So I really didn't think I had a chance at being able to grow an agricultural crop in my backyard. And I applied just to see what would happen. And Virginia actually was very open to looking at embracing new opportunities in urban communities for farmers, to explore what the opportunities were in the industrial hemp industry. And I was granted registration. And so in 2019, we actually grew our first hemp crop in my backyard. And as a result of the 2019 domestic hemp program interim rule, we were advised that we had to report our acreage to the FSA office, thus my introduction to FSA. And I'll wait and go further into that as we get into the additional questions. But that's my background. I am by profession, trained profession, a social worker, interested in helping people. And so that's my interest in the cannabis hemp industry.
Thank you both. You kind of segued into my first question, which is for both of you, what was your initial understanding and impressions of FSA before you started working with them? And then sort of what prompted you to begin a relationship with FSA, and how did that relationship initially start off?
Well,
And whoever wants to jump in first is fine.
Okay. My foray into working with FSA started as a new and beginning farmer. As I took programs with the Small Farm Outreach Program at Virginia State University, they made it clear that we needed to have a farm number in order to get certain benefits that USDA had to offer. And they directed us to go to our FSA office to start with that. And from there, you know, I learned a lot about the different opportunities that FSA had. One of the things that I like to do every time I go into one of the offices is to pick up little brochures that I can share with other new and beginning farmers that generally have sort of like Lisa had mentioned in her presentation, you know, the steps that you need to take to start working with them. And that farm number is so important to getting benefits that USDA has to offer. As a beekeeper, they also have insurance under the ELAP program. And I'm sorry, I don't know what ELAP stands for, what the acronym stands for, but it's similar to the NAP insurance. And as a new and beginning farmer, these insurance programs are free. Otherwise, you know, that would be additional expenses out of your pocket, your operating budget. The other thing that I loved is receiving the newsletters and going, you know, to my email box to understand, you know, when different programs that have the benefits that I look for, the ELAP, the NAP, are due, and, you know, the reporting requirements. It's very important that you engage with your county committee, because they have impacts on a lot of the federal assistance grants that come into your county and decide sometimes who gets high tunnels and who doesn't. And as a new and beginning farmer, after my second year of farming, I decided I was going to run for the county committee. One thing that a lot of BIPOC farmers don't realize, these people are getting paid, and, you know, they serve, but they're also paid servants. So you need to be involved in those elections, and you need to run for those positions. You can also sign up for text alerts. For a lot of farmers, that's really beneficial, because you don't have time oftentimes, you know, when it's crop season like it is now, to go to your computer and find out, well, what's the latest information that's coming out of the FSA office. And I agree, you know, asking for those receipts for service helps prevent miscommunications, because you think you may have said one thing and then the FSA agent has heard something totally different. And the other thing is, I'm in my 9th year of farming. So I've seen changes in the FSA office. I've seen, you know, with elections, new administrators come in, the office changes oftentimes with the politics in our nation. So, you know, it's important to get those receipts for service to make sure that what you're requesting is honored. And then when you call them, you have a record of how long it took to get that response. And if you don't get a response from from people, sometimes it's because, they're busy just like everybody else. And, sometimes emails go to the bottom. So it's important for you to follow up. Don't always say, I asked them and I got nothing in return. And then all these deadlines pass. So I recommend that you be proactive on your part as well. And if you don't get a response, they have a boss. And, we need to understand as farmers that we're paying these people salaries. So we can contact their boss and make sure that they do their work.
Thank you, Anita. Chardell, same question. Just what were your initial impressions and understanding of FSA before you started working with them?
So I honestly didn't have any idea what their role and responsibilities were until I had to reach out to them to understand what my responsibility was to file the acreage report. And in filing that acreage report, I learned more about what was required because they sent me a slew of paperwork that they needed in order to be able to better support and serve me. So they asked me questions about what I was doing, how long I was doing it. They wanted to know how I registered, and they actually scheduled an appointment to come out and do a site visit and linked me to NCRS or NRCS. And in that way, I became clearer about what their role and responsibilities were and how they could assist me. But it was by me asking questions about their role and responsibilities as well that helped me to better understand what programs and services they had to offer. And so it was a mutual exchange, me not knowing anything and then having to ask questions that actually brought me to a place where I had a better understanding of what they were able to do. But for me, because the hemp program, the domestic program, was still in a pilot phase in 2019, I was initially told that there was not much the FSA was going to be able to offer in terms of support because it was still a pilot program. And so because my focus was specifically on the hemp product, the hemp crop, there was some limitation initially in my understanding about what they could offer. But I kept the agents' names readily available. And so when the opportunity presented itself, I actually reached back out to those individuals who came to my home and asked additional questions once the USDA had the final rule and it was no longer a pilot project. And that's how I started my process of my long-term engagement, which has been now a little over a year with the FSA office and applying for the programs that they have available, particularly the farm ownership loan program.
Thank you. Connected to that, just wondering how both of you approach going to your FSA office, and especially now that you sort of gotten over that initial relationship hurdle of meeting, and sort of now you know your agents a little better. Are you still constantly preparing for those meetings with doing research, talking to other farmers, preparing documents? I'm just trying to get an idea of sort of how you're approaching each meeting with your FSA agent.
For me,
So,
go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, for me, I literally have never gone to the FSA office, and I've had contact with 4 over the last year and a half because of the particular situation that I'm in, where I had to ask lots of questions. I started with one FSA office, and because I've now transitioned to a new county, which initially I didn't know where I was going to wind up, I contacted the county where I thought I was going to purchase land, and contacted their FSA office and got one set of responses. And then when that didn't pan out and I found that there was another property in another county, I wound up contacting a different FSA office. And this is all telephone contact, me just picking up the phone and asking to speak to a representative in the FSA office under the farm loan program specifically, because that's what I was interested in. And I kept getting different responses that led me to do my own research and then call back and have to ask some specific questions about the program's design. And I also reached back out to the folks that came to my home initially and said, hey, listen, I'm getting different information from different people. And then I'm also reading some information that's available out on the web. And so help me understand and navigate how best to proceed. And I wound up calling the office back and saying, hey, this is what you told me when we last spoke. And I didn't even know about the receipt of services. Now that I know about that, I will be asking for a receipt of services. But the individuals that I spoke to never denied what they said. They actually said, well, that is true. When I brought up some things I had saw on the USDA website that they had not shared about the process of eligibility. And she said, well, I don't really know that, you could do that because this is the way it's structured. And I was like, okay, so I went to somebody else. So I just kept going to individuals to see how much I could learn from them, because different people, what I've learned in this process, know different things. And they're at different levels. And it may be because of staff turnover. They could be new to their position, or it could be a matter of their interpretation. But I literally have not had to visit a office personally in person. All of my contact has been by phone and by email as a follow-up. I did, in fact, though, request 2 site visits to the property that I did wind up purchasing from the FSA office. But again, it was related to the NRCS work, the soil conservation, HEL, and the wetland determination. But they were responsive. They came out, they met with me, they answered all the questions that I had. They spent a good deal of time. And when you talked about not agreeing with the determination or feedback that you received, I actually had that experience. And I questioned determination on the property that I was able to purchase. And the staff met me out on the property and literally walked through how they came to their determination so that I could better understand and be in alignment and agreement with their decision, and understood how that decision impacted my ability to move forward with the farm plan. So I think it's just it'll be situational, but I try to prepare my questions in advance so that when I finish talking to whoever I'm talking to, I know what I'm walking away with. I've learned not to make any assumptions.
And I would echo what she says. I recommend that you do as much research as you can online to find out about these programs, especially like the insurance programs as well as the loan programs. A lot of these people, when I first started going to the FSA office, my agent had probably 30, 40 years in that office. So she was really good. She came to my farm and, made appointments and pretty much held my hand. And later she retired. So, I've had a lot of new people that aren't as knowledgeable. The girl that's in the office now just started. So, every time you go in, she's got to call Richmond and relay your question. So, be mindful that, new people are going to be starting, and not everybody's going to have the knowledge that to explain the programs to you. That's why I recommend trying to do some footwork yourself to at least have a foundation when you go in about the program. But don't hesitate to ask them to explain, because if they can't explain, they should have supervisors to help you.
Thank you. And Chardell, you mentioned you're getting a farm loan or applying for a farm loan, and I'm wondering what other programs and services with FSA specifically have provided great benefit to your farm operation.
So right now we're in the process of applying for a home financing to put a home on the property. So that's the big step after having obtaining the ownership loan. The other areas where FSA is helping is that they have to now provide a remediation plan for highly erodible land determination. And so they're going to be involved with providing that support and making sure that plan is in place and is aligned with the business plan. So I feel like I have a resource that I can call and say, hey, listen, what are my next steps to actually putting the business plan in action? And I have a list of things that I need to do, because I have also applied for the high tunnel. And I was a little taken aback because I thought that the high tunnel application had been processed and that in this year I would be able to benefit from that, that loan program. And there was some miscommunication about whether or not the property was prepared or ready. And when he came out and did the site visit back in February, he was like, oh, I thought there was actually a crop here already. And so you've got to put in a year. And so basically after hearing that, I was not necessarily happy because I wasn't under that impression. That wasn't my understanding. And so I just nicely asked for him to list all of the requirements for me to have in place so that I knew that I would meet all of the criteria that was necessary to be eligible for the funding to purchase the first high tunnel. And so there are just a numerous opportunities and programs that you can talk to the FSA about to help you develop your plan for your farm. While I'm starting out with the hemp program, the hemp production program, I do see myself venturing into other areas of farming to include timberland, leaving some timber on the farm. And so they've just been, like I said, a great resource, but you've got to do your homework. You've got to ask your questions, and that services, that receipt of services that's going to be key. I wish I had have known that before today, because that would have been my paper trail for, what people have said and what has been done, and definitely be using that strategy moving forward.
Thank you. Anita, same thing. I'm wondering what programs and services have particularly benefited you and your farm.
Well, as we all know, farming is such a risk, and my FSA agent was very forthcoming about the NAP program, especially that beginning and limited resource farmers, socially disadvantaged farmers, and veterans are eligible for that free NAP insurance. And I think that's something that all new farmers should get, because, with climate change, you don't know whether you're going to have rain from year to year. In our area, I think it snowed last week, and, I do have high tunnels, but, in areas where you don't have high tunnels and you have those extreme temperatures, it may affect your crops. So please, everybody that's new and beginning, go out there and get that free NAP insurance. That at least provides you a 50% premium. And it goes the same thing for beekeepers. So those were the two items that, we were very fortunate to have had to help us with our farming operation.
Thank you. And on the flip side of that, could you both talk about experiences with FSA where things necessarily didn't go as planned? Maybe a challenge came up, and also how you worked through that challenge to sort of continue the relationship with your office or your particular agent.
Well, I guess for me, it was the high tunnels. When we first started farming, we were interested in high tunnels. And I know high tunnels come under the EQIP program under the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And, you know, when you're first starting out and they're throwing out all these acronyms, and in my instance, my USDA office houses FSA, the Natural Resource Conservation people, the Soil and Water District, they're all there. And when you're new and you hear all these acronyms, it gets really confusing. So, and knowing, you know, who's responsible for what. So, you know, in the same way, I was a little confused why my application was being denied. And so, you know, I went to the FSA office and I went online and did research and found out, you know, there is this county committee that votes, you know, on people getting resources. And so when I found out about that, I started researching the county committee. And I even went as far as finding out their calendar. I'm retired, so I have a lot of flexibility with my time. So I would sit in their meetings. You know, I wouldn't announce myself, I would be there. So, you know, sometimes as farmers, we have to make bold moves. And, you know, after I started inserting myself in their operations, I think I was taken a little bit more seriously about my desire to move my farming operation forward and getting the resources that I needed. So, you know, don't be meek, stand up for yourselves. And, you know, if there's an instance where you're still getting that backlash, you know, contact resources like RAFI to serve as that intermediary to help you be heard.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Chardell, same question for you.
So one of the challenges that I had with FSA was in obtaining the farm ownership loan and going through that process. And so there is a regulation in the USDA regs that states that in order for the Farm Service Agency to accept an application, not even process, accept an application, the person has to have a legal purchase contract, which is very different in the commercial residential real estate industry, in that you get a pre-approval of what you're capable of, what you're approved to purchase. On the FSA ownership loan side, the FSA office doesn't provide you with a pre-approval, but they require you to have a purchase contract. And when you are dealing with real estate professionals, they want to see a pre-approval letter that you're qualified to engage in the conversation about purchasing the property that you're talking about. And so to me, it just seemed odd that you would require a purchase contract but not provide a pre-approval letter. And so in reading the regs, I thought that just didn't make sense. And so I questioned whether the regs were being interpreted and applied correctly. And I spoke to the farm loan manager. He connected me to the Richmond office. I spoke to the individuals at the Richmond office and shared what my concern was and what I had experienced, because the realtor that I had engaged was not willing to provide a purchase contract for the land that we had identified because he didn't know me from Adam. And when I had asked the farm loan manager, well, how does this get done? Give me an example. And he said, basically, you have to know someone. You know, it's a neighbor selling to a neighbor, or a father selling to their son. And to me, that just did not seem like there was fair access to this resource, if that is the way in which you obtain a purchase contract, right? Because someone who doesn't know you is not just going to be willing to provide a legal purchase contract, take their property off the market so that you can go through this USDA FSA farm loan review approval that could literally take months depending on, what level of review is required for that ownership loan. I wound up contacting my local congressional representative because I just did not believe that this could be the correct interpretation, and that should have been an or, not and a requirement. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear what I wanted to hear. When it went up through the review, my congressional representative came back and said, well, no, Chardell, that's what they said is the regulation. And so, of course, I had to live with that decision. But I made it known through the ranks that I did not believe that that was a fair and equitable way for individuals to be able to access that resource. Because if someone wasn't willing to take a chance on you, you weren't going to be able to obtain that purchase contract.
Thank you. And both of you have hit on this, in your previous comments, but I'm wanting to kind of get your parting insights on advice you have for farmers who are nervous about working with FSA, whether it's because of the size of their farm, whatever reason there might be, and having in their mind that maybe FSA can't help them, can't do anything for them. What advice and insights you might share with them, and also as a part of that, is there a way for farmers to sort of work together and support each other when it comes to interacting with their FSA office and agents?
I believe the FSA office works for us. We are taxpayers. We pay their salaries, and they're obligated to provide these services. I believe in standing up for myself, and I think as farmers, we have a long history, especially as Black and other minorities, which she explained in her introduction. And we're long overdue, the respect that we deserve as farmers. You can't be timid when you go in these offices, and you can't allow them to get away with bad service, customer service. Just like she said, she wrote to her local congressional office for assistance. Even though she didn't get the answers she wanted, it was still in writing that, there was this conflict. And if we can show records of repeated, conflicts, we can show a pattern of discrimination, and change will happen. I believe in, doing my memorandums for record. After I have an engagement with somebody in the office, especially if it's some technical information that I'm seeking, I will sit down and send them an email. This is my understanding of our conversation on this day. I asked you these questions. These were your responses. And then at the end, I'll say things like, how long will it take for a response? If it's a question, or how long will it take to receive these services? So be proactive as farmers, because, our time is valuable as well as their time. So, ask for those receipts of service, and continue to advocate for yourselves.
I wholeheartedly concur. I think one of the strategies that I've used is call and call again and call again. I actually said to one of the FSA officers, this timing has been much longer than I had anticipated. And while I understand that there are lots of things happening and, a lot of moving parts to this process, I feel like I have not been kept informed, and I've given a lot of space thinking things are happening when in fact it doesn't seem like anything is happening in the way in which I'm thinking it should happen. And so I actually said to one of the FSA officers, I'm going to call you every day now. So I just want to put you on notice, because I don't want to be at the bottom of your to-do list, because I now have waited 3 months and I thought things were moving along, and apparently they haven't been. And so I've been very clear, and I try not to get frustrated with them, but I let them know that I'm not going to not call. So expect my call. I want an update when I call on what needs to happen, or what's expected to happen. Let me know if there's something that I need to do that you haven't received from me, because if I'm the holdup, I need to get out of my own way. However, if you're the holdup, then that's a different conversation. And I'd like an explanation as to what the holdup is and what are we going to do differently. So that if there's a need to expedite a process, what does that look like? Because I don't mind asking for an expedited process, because there has been miscommunication between what I thought was going to happen and what you understood to happen. So I've just tried to develop relationships and set expectations with the individuals in the various offices. And now I'm working with 2 different offices. The farm loan is in one office, and the FSA services are in a different office. And so it's an interesting dynamic. And you have to, as Anita said, you have to know who you're talking to. And I'm still learning that, right? I'm still learning the integration and the interconnectedness between the various offices and who's responsible for what. And that has been one of my challenges. Is I'm thinking one person is handling it, and what has to be done has to be done by another office and another official. And so where's the breakdown in that communication? And so I started asking more questions. Well, who's that person? Give me that person's number, because I'll call them myself. I don't have a problem with helping to facilitate the connection. I'm not retired, but I find time for what's important to me. And so we need to get some things done. Let's get the work done. And so that's what's been helpful. And it, again, I think following up with the email, or asking them to follow up with an email, so that you know where you are in your process. I think that's the one thing that has been most challenging for me. Is I think I should be much further along, but I think, I don't want to hound people. And so I think I'm giving grace. And then when I think it should be done, I call and find out nothing has been done. Oh, well, we're past that time frame now. I call as much as I need to.
Thank you. Thank you both. I wanted to leave space for if anyone wanted to ask any questions directly to Anita or Chardell. Feel free to drop it in the chat, or you can come off mute. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you both can see the chat, but you've already gotten some kudos and appreciation there for just your time and your insights.
Sabine, were there any other questions in the chat from earlier that?
Not that have come in. There were some more around some of the same things around value added grants. And if Lisa wants to take one of those, but if there's any questions specifically for the panelists, those haven't come in yet.
Yeah, I can answer that quickly. For anyone that's interested in the value added producers grant, that's not through FSA, it's through an office called Rural Development, but it's a grant available to help farmers either create new value-added products or expand to new markets with their value-added products. That grant's open right now. The deadline is May 16th. We did a quick video on Facebook Live about a couple weeks ago where I did a longer overview of that program. So if you're curious about it, I'd check that out. But if you go to www.RAFI-USA.org, there's a banner along the top with a button to watch that. And then the other place to look would be your find your state VAPG contact. So let me add this link in the chat. That's the main VAPG page. If you go in there and select your specific state and then go to contact, it will list the person to contact. So every state has a VAPG person within rural development. Their job is to help farmers put together applications and to help them craft competitive applications. So if you're serious about applying, I would definitely reach out to that person, review some of the documents that are also on that website. That's kind of your starting point. I saw another question a little further up about kind of receiving receipts for service retroactively. And that's one that I would want to ask about that. I don't know that for sure. I know that FSA will keep kind of your file. Everyone has a file of information that includes the documents that you have submitted. What I don't know is if that file also includes emails and summaries of phone conversations. But I can follow up on that and get that answer, unless either Chardell or Anita are aware of that.
That I'm not aware of, but like I said, I do memorandums for record, and I usually email that person to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what the requirements were at that time and who committed to do what and what my understanding of our conversation was. So, even with that, especially if you don't have a receipt for service, you can always email and say, on this day, I spoke to this person about this subject, and we discussed these things. At that time, this person committed to do X, Y, and Z, and I provided these documents and, summarize the event.
Someone asked about the North Carolina contact. I'll put that in the chat, and then we can also put the website in the chat.
And maybe just, I was looking at that North Carolina question, if either panelists have tips. How do you know who to get in touch with? Which person did you contact in your office, if you're not getting a response from someone?
Well, in our instance, if I'm not getting a response from my local office, then I know my state office is in Richmond, and I always have their information, and I can contact their supervisor in that office and let them know the situation. And, if you go online, their email contacts are there, and I could always, share that information, my memos of record, my, memorandums of understanding of our conversations, those kinds of things to help build your case about non-support. And then, if you want to add a little fire to that conversation, you can always CC your congressional representatives at the same time. And I bet you'll get a response within a week.
So I know for me, I've called the office, and if I can't get the person who I am looking for, I'll call the main number and say, who else is in the office I can speak to? And do they have access to my file? And then if I don't get a response there, then I would follow what has just been shared, going to the state office. But I typically ask for a supervisor if I can't get the person who I've been talking to. I've not necessarily had that problem where I had to do that, but that seems like the prudent thing that is doable. I do have a question though, as a new farmer, and someone mentioned the county office of record where your paperwork is. Can you all shed some light on whether or not that changes, or can you keep it the same? Because my understanding is I've delegated a particular county to be my county record of office. And it doesn't matter anywhere else in the state where I can go and farm, all of my records are going to be with that county office. Is that accurate?
That's another one where I'd want to do a little extra research to give a definite number or a definite answer. I do know for like particular programs, you still need to work with whatever office, county office, where like an event occurred. Like if you had NAP crop insurance and had a crop failure that was in a different county from you, kind of your central one, you would still need to work with that office in order to access that program. But any sort of interaction that you're having with FSA is still going to be kind of kept in, you know, the cloud of your account and your interactions, and should be accessible to, you know, between offices as well, I would imagine. But I can look more into that.
Thank
I would
you.
also check on farmers.gov. There's a portal where some of your documents are kept. So you should create an account on farmers.gov and see if those documents are there.
So I asked that question because when I was trying to process the application for the farm ownership loan, the office in question where the property was located initially did not take it. And so I sent it to the office where they seemed to be more open and had a different understanding of what that process was. And then I made them my home record of office. Did I say that right? The office where the land was kept. That was the recording county. That's what they're called. It's the recording office for all of your records. And then they sent the application to where the county where the land was. And that's how I was able to get the process started.
Any other questions from people on the call, either in chat or off of mute?
It looks like we have a question from Carrie. For the panel, what are your suggestions for me, since I'm currently stuck renting my home and gardening in the backyard? Can I still qualify and get started somewhere with FSA, etc.?
I would say you could, because just like Chardell just shared, she started her hemp operation in her backyard. So I would make that appointment with FSA to get your farm number, because that's where the magic happens. You've got to have a registered farm location in order to receive services.
Okay, sounds good.
And I concur with that. Contacting your local office and asking them to come out and do what is necessary. There's be some paperwork that would have to be filed in order for that farm number to be issued. But that's the way I started. But it was my start was I was actually trying to file the acreage report. And then they came back and they said, well, here are the documents you need to complete. And that was what started the farm number issuance. But there's also, even if you're in an urban backyard, urban setting, there's so much work that's being done to support farmers in urban communities, right? So expanding the farming industry out of rural areas and into urban areas. And so regardless to whether you're rural or urban, they should be open to supporting that.
Okay. And I'm actually interested in moving into like a different county. So that's another layer of, I don't know, how that's going to work with us qualifying, because I'm in a rental right now, but we actually want to relocate to a different county. So I guess just contact that county that we're interested in moving in.
That's what I would do wherever you're going to have your farming operation, and make sure you ask them what documents you need. I have a little brochure that tells me that you need to have proof of identity, such as a driver's license, Social Security card, IRS number. You got to have proof of ownership of your farming location, a copy of a deed or leases, and then a copy of something that identifies whether you're going to farm as a sole proprietor. If you're going to be an LLC, then you're going to need like things like the articles of incorporation, any trust or deed documents, or a partnership agreement. So, you know, come prepared so that you aren't running back and forth to get the process resolved.
And a quick question on that. I do actually have a business, and I was wondering, can I do a DBA, like doing business as can that be the farm, or should I just open up a whole nother LLC?
That question I would ask your small business development center. I'm not, you know, don't want to give you any legal advice. I'm not an attorney, but there should be a small business development center advisor that you can turn to help you with that kind of technical issue.
All right, appreciate it. Yep.
Great. If there are no other questions, I think we will wrap up with a couple things. First, I wanted to kind of summarize ways that RAFI is going to follow up and can help. For everyone that's attending today and for anyone that registered, we'll be sending out a link to the webinar recording. We can also share a PDF of the slides if you didn't get everything written down that you wanted to. We also will send an email to complete a webinar evaluation. Let me also just put it in the chat right now. It's really helpful to get feedback on the webinars to know what sort of information is useful, if it inspires you to take action, or if there's things you'd like to see in future events. So if you have a few minutes, please go ahead and fill that out. Other ways that RAFI can help, like I mentioned at the top of the call, we are available for one-on-one technical assistance broadly around FSA issues. So even if it's just like starting out, if you have a particular question about NAP or things like that, we're available through email, phone, or that intake form, and I have some of that contact information at the bottom of that screen. On our website, we have some program flyers, past webinar recordings, and we hope to do more webinars coming up. And we are also hoping to start offering some FSA loan specific technical assistance later this year. And we'll be posting a job position for that soon. So if anyone on this call is either interested or knows someone that might be interested, keep an eye out for that. I'll also mention that we have a webinar coming up at the end of the month around GAP certification and organic certification as part of our market readiness series. So if anyone would be interested in learning more about that, they can go on our website to register, and I'll try to throw that in the link, that link into the chat right now. I believe that's it. I just want to give appreciation again for Chardell and Anita for sharing this evening, and for everyone that's attended. Please reach out if there's additional questions. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Thank you so much.